Chapter 13. When Feelings Remain Unresolved. Have you ever known an older person, anyone from 50 on up, depending on your definition of old, with definite idiosyncrasies such as living in the past, telling and retelling stories of bygone years, feeling that everyone is taking advantage of them, that they never can afford anything, or that they always have to be right? Sometimes their idiosyncrasies are such a pronounced part of them that it's challenging to find the person they really are, or the person they used to be. From where do these idiosyncrasies stem? They stem from a person's incorrect perceptions and their inability to communicate what they are truly feeling. Thus, their negative feelings remain unresolved. Those unresolved feelings that have been buried in the older person for years have caused their memory of perfection to be covered over. Because of these buried feelings, the negative vibrations created by them have become multiplied and magnified, producing blocks that cloud the older person's reasoning. As deeply buried negative feelings continue to be validated throughout a person's life, the covering over the memory of perfection becomes thicker and thicker with age, and further produces negative vibrations and blocks. As time progresses, these negative vibrations and blocks gather more strength and power, covering the truth of the cell's perfection. The light or truth is obscured from the person, and this covering continues to perpetuate more and more negative energy, which in turn causes gross confusion in the person. This negative energy finally becomes so pronounced that that person becomes fragmented and overwhelmed, as evidenced by their idiosyncrasies. Unknowingly, they are literally being controlled by their unresolved, buried negative feelings. If you desire to help them in altering their thinking or feeling patterns, you could talk until you were blue in the face, attempting to persuade or convince a person with these idiosyncrasies that they would be much happier and have peace if they would change. However, no amount of talking or reasoning is able to change those negative, supercharged vibrations unless the older person wants to make a quantum leap and heal at the cell level. If there is to be a significant resolution of these quirks in an older person's life, that resolution has to come at the cell level from within. This cell level change can transpire by developing a conscious awareness of what the feelings are that are bothering the person, and by using the script to effect a change of these feelings. However, it is commonly known that at a certain point in an older person's life, they're usually not willing to change or even listen to any suggestion that a change may be in order. John Bradshaw tells us in his book, Healing the Shame That Binds You, that underneath the mask of adult behavior, there is a child who was neglected. This needy child is insatiable, and what that means is that when the child becomes an adult, there is a hole in his soul. I firmly believe that the hole in the soul is due to a person's lack of success in returning to that place of comfort and peace, which is discussed in Chapter 4, and also an inability to resolve old negative feelings that were generated, called into existence, at birth or in their youth. These old feelings have subsequently remained unattended, hurting and crying. They still need to be resolved and released. This child in the aging body has a difficult time producing the necessary mental or emotional shifts that would facilitate elimination of the old behavioral patterns. Consequently, emotional healing becomes more of a challenge. The old programming or mindset that they grew up with was ignore, deny your feelings. This mindset creates responses that allowed the mind to support a wild imagination, thereby undoubtedly developing a large range of mountains out of a lot of little molehills. Many older people with idiosyncrasies continue to be unrealistic and immature in their view of life. They can engage in endless, mindless, unconscious chatter and prattle. Thus their long-standing incorrect perceptions continue to be perpetuated. Very often they do not want to be bothered with what is, especially if what is challenging to them. They're tired of struggling, tired of disappointments, and tired of responsibility. Mindlessness, often for them, is the rule of the day. We are very fortunate indeed if this is not the case with any of our loved ones. Most older people rarely knew what they were truly feeling through the years of their life. Many still do not know what they feel, so it would be more difficult for them to effect a resolution in their lives unless they're able to identify their feelings and willingly use the script to alter them. However, all is not lost. Just as members of one family have a similar genetic makeup, they also have a similar emotional makeup. Vibrational energies from feelings in a person are stored in the DNA and therefore can be passed from parents to children through this same DNA. When you process your feelings and change them, you are benefiting your parents and your children as well. For this reason, it is imperative that you get in touch with your true feelings as early as possible in life, so the negative energy does not build up. When you become responsible for your feelings and will own them, then happily go about resolving and releasing these feelings, the chances for a smoother, less stressful, and more peaceful life, now and in your later years, are much more predictable. You may be able to avoid those undesirable idiosyncrasies later. Little children are very adept and piercing in their recognition of the feelings they're experiencing. When taught to utilize the script, they embrace the idea quickly and are very willing and enthused about participating. The wonderful aspect of children sharing in this is that they have fewer years of life's feelings to work through. Therefore, everything about them responds much more readily to the script. Whereas an adult has many more years and layers upon layers of bottled up feelings, a thicker covering over the memory of perfection to process and uncover. The keys that either open the door or closes the door to a child sharing and trusting their feelings is determined by the way we, as parents or adults, communicate with that child. Communication is the means whereby we acquire or impart information. When we receive information, we expect it to be accurate and that we can depend upon it, that we won't be hurt when we use it. We expect the information we receive to be unambiguous. If it isn't clear and concise, we become confused. We also seem to expect that the information communicated to us on the various levels should be consistent. But is it? And if information communicated to us is inconsistent or confusing, imagine how a child is affected by this same kind of communication. The following illustration is taken from the book The Origins of Illness and Anxiety by J.A. Winters, M.D. Take the case of Bobby, a 4-year-old boy. He asks his mother if he can go out and play. Mother is a little out of sorts that day, and so she snaps, "No, you stay in the house." "But why can't I?" "I don't want you to. Now, be quiet. I'm not going to argue with you." Bobby puckers up his face and starts to cry. "Stop that crying," his exasperated mother yells. "You can't go out, and that's all there is to it." Bobby wails louder. and his mother slaps him. "There, that'll teach you not to cry. Now sit down and behave yourself." Bobby sits down, confused and bewildered. He's angry, fearful, sad, and defiant all at the same time. He scowls and thinks about what he's going to do when he grows up. He's tense and he squirms around in the chair in an involuntary release of the pressure of his emotional energy. His mother feels a little ashamed at losing her temper, yet tries to convince herself that her actions were justified. She sees her son's restlessness increasing and finally she relents. "You can go out now, dear, but there's something I want to tell you first. You know that Mother loves you, but she doesn't want you to be a crybaby. And you have to learn to do what I tell you. Mother knows what's best for you." This sounds like a rather common household tragedy, doesn't it? Let's look at it from the standpoint of communication, however, and see what Bobby might have learned from the experience. First, how consistent was the information which he got? He saw that his mother's face was flushed and heard her yell at him. Previous experience told him that that meant she was angry. She also acted angry in that she slapped him. That information is pretty consistent. Then he has to reconcile this with the words, "Mother loves you," "Mother doesn't want you to be a crybaby," and "Mother knows what's best," and so on. At first, wanting to go out was dangerous, and then suddenly it became safe. If Bobby were to take literally what his mother has said, and we know that children are quite literal-minded, he might learn from this experience that being loved is also being slapped, that asking questions leads to punishments, that punishment is the best thing. It's quite confusing, and the confusion could have been avoided if Mother had made her words consistent with her deeds. Dr. Winters goes on to talk about other misuses of communication. He particularly refers to people who mislabel their own feelings. Doctors see this very often. The patient says, "I feel terrible. I ache all over. I'd give anything to feel better." And the patient's actions during this little speech indicate that he's proud of being ill, that this illness is valuable, and that he's going to hold on to it. Or another example is the person who seems to enjoy martyrdom, who gasps, moans, and sighs, "I'm all right, don't pay any attention to me." Are these people faking? Does this sort of behavior mean that the illness is unreal? No, definitely not. It indicates, rather, that they haven't learned how to say with words the things they're feeling in their bodies. The meanings of their communications are confused. They say things with one meaning, then they do things with another meaning. This very confusion leads to a change in the way they feel. But they don't feel as they say they're feeling. Now, doesn't that sound confusing? It is this kind of confusion which compounds the miscommunication. A child becomes much more aware of what makes him or her tick when parents are consistent in the messages they convey through their caring love and discipline. When there's less conflict in the messages that a child receives from mom and dad. There's also less confusion as to his or her value in the family. And the child is much more receptive to learning, more sensitive to others, and more mindful of his or her thoughts and feelings at an early age. Parents who continually validate their child's feelings without judgment help create an atmosphere where the child and all around him or her are permitted love and acceptance. Healthy emotional growth in the child is a natural byproduct when parents validate their children. This healthy emotional climate allows further growth and development to occur in all areas of a child's life, and the memory of perfection in the cell doesn't become as clouded and distorted. A very meaningful way to support a child in his willingness to own his feelings and to validate him as a human being is to allow him to express his joys or frustrations when he comes home from school, how he feels with playing with friends, when having a bad day, when he is cross and mean to a friend or sibling. When a child expresses anger, hate, disappointment, resentment, hurt, or whatever. Let him feel what he feels, without making a judgment about it or shaming him. Validate him and what he is feeling by verbalizing back to him what you think he's saying. When a child is shamed, he gets the message that he's defective, flawed, or always making mistakes. This creates unnecessary and unfounded guilt in the child. Unfounded guilt can truly sabotage a child's healthy emotional growth, undermine his sense of worth, and create scars that become deeply embedded in his soul, perhaps lasting a lifetime. His blueprint becomes sadly distorted, and aspects of his false self emerge. If you see where some improvements need to take place with the child, all that is necessary to assist the child is responding positively to your suggestions, is to talk with him in a calm, loving, supportive manner, validating what he is feeling. That is, explore with him what he's really feeling and the reasons he may be feeling it. Let the child know that it's all right to feel what he does. All feelings are permissible. Help him understand that it's what he does with those feelings that determines whether he experiences a negative, unhappy, or positive, happy outcome. Teach him the law of cause and effect. One client, Jim, was constantly made to feel guilty by his parents when he didn't perform exactly to their specifications or do exactly the way his father would. Indeed, guilt was so well programmed in him that he, after leaving home at college age, would subconsciously set up situations to create the guilt that he had been so amply programmed to feel at home. At the beginning of his college stay, Jim wasn't experiencing the familiar guilt that he had grown accustomed to. He seemed to have a need to return to that old pattern in order to recognize and validate himself. And because Jim was not comfortable unless he was feeling guilty, his quiet master Tate began to set up that which had been so well programmed in his mind. It was interesting to watch the behavior that Jim exhibited in order to heap guilt upon himself, when it really wasn't necessary. If a child is experiencing a negative feeling, suggest to him that perhaps he would like to look at the negative feeling in a new way. Ask him if he'd like to substitute the way he's feeling now, at that moment, with a more comfortable, peaceful feeling. If the child responds affirmatively, then have him sit down, relax, and close his eyes. Have him repeat in his mind what you say. At that point, go through the script stating at the appropriate place the negative feeling that he identified earlier. Then at the appropriate place, toward the end of the script, substitute the negative feeling with a positive one. It's very easy, and they can do it in just a minute or two. You'll be amazed at the calm, happy child they become. Another aspect of a child's feeling that we need to consider here is how he or she responds inwardly to what is taking place in his or her everyday life within the family unit and among friends or at school. Naturally, a child is being affected by the experiences of everyone around them. For instance, if mom and dad aren't getting along too well, the child is sensitive to this. The child may never refer to the situation, but nevertheless they're feeling something. They are being emotionally affected by the vibrations created by mom and dad. And usually the effect is very devastating to them. The child may be too young to even talk, but even if they're able to talk, they often don't know or understand what they're feeling, or that they are even being affected. An illustration of this point: 5-year-old Tracy was visiting his grandmother, a woman I know who uses the script. Tracy had been experiencing adenoid problems, which caused him to breathe through his mouth instead of effortlessly through his nose. His mother and father had been divorced for over a year. Before the divorce, There was a lot of arguing and fighting. Tracy's mother, Sue, now has the sole responsibility of raising him and his 2-year-old sister. It's been necessary for Sue to work full-time, so Tracy and his sister are taken care of by babysitters. Their time with their mother is rather limited, so there's not a lot of fun time spent together. She's got a boyfriend who doesn't seem to enjoy Tracy and his little sister very much. One day Tracy was visiting his grandmother. She was quite concerned with his inability to breathe through his nose. As they were sitting on the sofa reading a book, Grandma stopped reading to him and asked him to breathe through his nose. "I can," he said. She asked him to let her see how he couldn't breathe through his nose. So Tracy showed her. She then asked him if he would like to try something to see if it would help him so that he could breathe through his nose again. He readily agreed to try what Grandma wanted him to do. She looked up the emotional causes for adenoid problems, which are acute disharmony in the home, feels restricted in life, feels unacceptance or hostility from someone. Tracy's grandmother then asked him to close his eyes and repeat after her. She then led him through the script. When they finished, Grandma was quiet for a few minutes and then asked Tracy to take a deep breath through his nose, which he did. Much to his surprise and delight, he was starting to be able to breathe through his nose. Before he left her home that evening, he was able to breathe normally. Tracy didn't forget this experience. He left town and didn't get to see his grandmother for several months. But upon his return, he was manifesting some hidden anger in his behavior. As Tracy's grandmother put him to bed one night, she really let him know that she did not appreciate his behavior. She talked to him as though he were an adult, hoping to indicate the depth of her concern about the way he was acting. Upon finishing what she had to say, Tracy asked her if they could go through the talk, as he called it, the one that helped him breathe better. Grandma responded. As they completed going through the script, for some of the things at which Tracy seemed to be angry, his grandmother told me a calm and peace came over him that was very much like transformation. Tracy seemed like a different child. He has since asked to use the script several times. Each time this little 5-year-old can tell a difference in the way he feels. Children learn very fast and are usually more willing to respond to true principles and change than adults. However, if they decline, don't push them. They deserve free choice in the matter. When parents condemn or ridicule a child for his feelings, he becomes very confused. A child views his parents as knowing everything and always being right. So he thinks something must be wrong with him, that he doesn't know what he is feeling. He may say or think to himself, "I must not know what I'm feeling because Mom or Dad said so." When this happens over and over, the child starts to doubt himself. When the self-doubt is consistently reinforced, eventually he will turn his feelings off, because emotionally it is too painful to be unsure of himself and his feelings on a continual basis. At this point, he allows others to dictate his feelings to him. He does not understand what he is feeling, except that he is confused. He may turn to outside stimulus for comfort, or try to be validated by his peers, often succumbing to peer pressure. The child's feelings of valuable self-worth, self-respect, and high self-esteem, which most human beings yearn to feel, are sadly a long time in coming, if ever. The most tragic realization from counseling for me is how many people do not accept or love themselves. Most people even have an extreme difficult time forgiving themselves, and are usually without a clue as to what and why they're not forgiving themselves. This is the result we witness when people mislabel their own feelings. That insidious misuse of communication, as incredible as it may seem, many adults do not even know what they feel on a daily basis. How many years have they been miscommunicating with themselves? When parents accept each child the way he is and consistently validate his feelings, teaching him with love and patience, helping him to understand what appropriate and inappropriate feelings are without judging, then assist him in shifting his fear-based inappropriate feelings to love-based appropriate feelings. By using the script, the child will have a much better opportunity to progress through life with more confidence and higher self-esteem. The child will also have a more mature and deeper sense of inner peace and be able to better identify with the world around him because of his understanding of his feelings. Perhaps in doing this, there will be a happier, healthier community of senior citizens by the time today's children reach that age. I know this is possible by just observing the major changes which have taken place in people who've already made the commitment to be accountable for their thoughts and feelings. Many times upon learning new or different principles, we will nod our head in agreement as to their soundness and ring of truth. We may even say, yeah, I want to apply these principles and make them part of my life. But in the next breath, we continue in our old patterns, having the new concept uppermost in our mind at first, but never quite making the internal commitment it takes to initiate a change. Our intentions may be good, but we never seem to get around to it. Let me just say, it is necessary to do more than intellectualize these principles. Transformation can take place only when we internalize these principles and act upon them.